Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In this particular video, we are going to discuss about the recent unfortunate crash of Air India flight that we saw on Thursday in Ahmedabad. Flight crashed just few minutes into the flight. It was just few hundred feet above the ground, and in the densely populated region of the city is where it has crashed. Now, if you look at the history of air disasters, air crashes, what we observe generally, if you look at the pattern in last 50 years or so, most of the air crashes, air accidents and disasters have taken place in two phases of the flight. That is during the time of takeoff or in the duration of takeoff or during the landing phase. In the majority of the time when airline or aircraft actually is flying at a cruising altitude, number of disasters have been minuscule in nature, and in that also number of casualties or fatalities have been very less. So let us try to examine that why most of disasters take place in two major phases, that is takeoff and landing. But we know, first of all, unfortunately, the Air India flight that crashed in the Ahmedabad, we still have not received a proper detailed reasoning behind this, what has resulted into this particular kind of crash. Most of people argue that it is because of the stall phase in which flight has went to, but it will take maybe months before there is any official confirmation on the matter as such. That said, data has shown that most crashes take place during landing or takeoff phases. So let us try to look at this. Now first of all, let us try to understand the data. First of all, if we look at an organization that is IATA, it is a UN based organization called as International Air Transport Association. What it has confirmed that 53%, that means we can say that more than half of all the aviation accidents, whether we are talking about minor accidents, whether we are talking about major accidents, specifically if you refer to last 19 years between 2005 to 23, it has taken place during the landing phase. Similarly, if you look at the takeoff phase, it is the next most deadly phase of the air crashes, where 8.5% of all accident is seen. That means if you combine the landing phase and takeoff phase together, they contribute to roughly what we can say 63% of the total air crashes or air disasters. This we can also understand from this particular distribution chart that has been released by IATA. Again, as you can see, landing contribute to 53% of the total accidents. Number of accidents 738. Similarly, if we talk about takeoff phase, it has contributed to 118 accidents, contributing to 8.5%. Then further third is the approach phase. Approach phase is basically referred to before aircraft touch the ground. When it is going to land, that is the phase which is called as approach phase, that constitute 8.3%. Initial climb, cruise, taxi, rejected takeoff. So all these are other kind of phases we can highlight in which other disasters or other accidents has taken place here. Now, if you look at the accident based on the phases, as I told you that 20% of all the accidents that we have seen in the cases or in the history of aviation, they took place during either the takeoff phase or initial climb phase. Initial climb phase refer to that phase of aircraft when it is gaining maximum altitude in a shortest duration of time. So if you have been in flight, you would have seen that just after aircraft take off from the runway, it then goes almost very steep, we can say at very steep slope, it climbs up at very high rate. After that, the rate at which aircraft's altitude rises, it becomes relatively low. So that is called as the delayed climb phase. So in the initial climb phase and takeoff phase consists of 20% of the accident, and not only the number of accident but fatalities also you can see is about 20% in this particular accident as such. Now, we talk about in terms of exposure, the takeoff phase and initial climb phase make up just 2% of the exposure. Now, what does 2% of exposure mean? As per the IATA, exposure refer to that duration of the aircraft journey, which consists of the entire phase, we can say right from the taxiing all the way to again what you can call as landing and then stopping as such. So basically 2% of exposure means that aircraft phase can be classified into three major phases. One is the runway, that is taxiing on the runway, then after you have the climb, then aircraft achieves or attains a cruising altitude where it spends most of the time, and then further it approaches the runway and then lands on the runway. So if we try to understand about this phase, that is the initial climb phase and the takeoff phase, they make up just 2% of time, and this duration has been taken based on 1.5 hour of the journey of aircraft as such. The subsequent climb phase accounted for another 10% of fatal accidents, and notably 35% of fatalities as such, despite accounting for only 14% exposure. That means you try to understand about subsequent climb, that we have talked about the delayed climb that occurs after initial ascent phase. It make up 14% of total time duration of an aircraft, but is responsible for 35% of fatalities as such. Similarly, if you look at the final approach and landing phases, they account for 47% of all accident and 37% of fatalities. And similarly, the descent phase accounted for another 3% of accidents and 7% of fatalities. So that is how we can understand the distribution of air disasters, air accidents and fatality based on in which phase aircraft is present in. Now, if you look at the cruise phase, first of all, as I told you, refer to that phase of the aircraft journey when it is moving in what we can call as a stable altitude and a steady speed. There is no variation in the height, no variation in the speed as such, and this generally takes place in the lower stratospheric region of the atmosphere. If you try to understand, our atmosphere can be divided into 5 layers. The lowermost layer in which we live, where most of weather phenomena are taking place, is called as troposphere. Beyond troposphere, you have a stratosphere. Now, in the troposphere, which is where most of the aircraft either take off or land, and then the cruising height of the aircraft, try to understand, cruising journey of the aircraft largely takes place in the lower part of stratosphere, where what you can call as the wind speed is very less, and because wind speed is very less, you have very less turbulence in that altitude as such. So that is why aircraft is flying at stable altitude and steady speed. It accounts for only 10% of the fatal accidents and less than 0.5% of fatalities. That means we can say this is the safest part or safest portion of an aircraft journey right from takeoff to landing as such. And if you try to understand, this phase makes up 57% of the exposure. Exposure again refer to the total duration of journey and in which how much percentage time an aircraft is spending in each of the phases. So in the cruising phase, it spent 57% of its time, and despite this, only 10% of fatal accidents have taken place here and only 0.5% of fatalities you can see from here. So this also is a very interesting example. If you look at the image down here, this is an image of Aloha airline. Now, when Aloha airline was at its cruising altitude, what we saw is that, as you can see, the entire upper roof of aircraft basically blew away due to some structural problems and such. But despite that, aircraft was able to land safely and only few people lost their life. Most of people who were sitting there, especially those who had tied up seat belt around them, they were safe. So that is why you can understand that even though it seems a very deadliest disaster taking place in cruising altitude, airline was able to land safely as such. So this is how we have to understand the vulnerability of an aircraft in different phases of its journey as such. Now, question comes that, as discussed before, why it is the takeoff phase and landing phase which is the deadliest phase in an aircraft journey as such. So there are several reasons behind this which we can discuss one by one. First of all, in both of these phases, aircraft is flying in the tropospheric region and is very close to ground as such. So basically what we can say, that aircraft is both low in terms of the vertical height and slow in terms in what you can call as in terms of speed as such. So because of this, if something goes wrong, pilot has very what you can call as very short reaction time or very low reaction time, because he has to take whatever he want to do, he has to do it very fast, because if something fails, aircraft it falls very fast on the ground surface, as we have seen in the recent Air India disaster, because we have not gained altitude. So that is why the probability of accidents and air crashes is quite high in this stage. Second, we can also understand that if similar kind of accidents like engine problems, let us say, for example, takes place when aircraft already has gained a high altitude. Now, in those cases, aircraft does not just fall out of the sky at a very fast rate, rather aircraft becomes a kind of glider. Glider means it is slowly descending and moving toward the ground surface. For example, if you look at the data, a typical airliner loses about a mile in altitude. For every 10 mile it moves forward. That means every 10 mile aircraft is moving forward. 1 mile is how its vertical height is shrinking. So if it is very high, let us say at cruising altitude, airline generally cruise an altitude of, let us say, 6, 8, 12 kilometers or something like that. So in that case, pilot has a little over 8 minutes before it can basically crash on the ground. And in those 8 minutes, a lot of life-saving measures can be taken, a lot of what you can say communication can be made between the air traffic control and the pilot, and based on that they can easily find a place where they can try to safely land the aircraft, even if aircraft has suffered from some kind of setbacks, problems or malfunction as such. But this time is not available to the aircraft which is, let us say, just few hundred feet above the ground, because in few seconds it would simply crash and land on the ground as such. So a multitude of environmental and situational factors also put stresses on the aircraft during the takeoff phase and landing phase, because again, if you try to understand, when aircraft is trying to take off, it is trying to fight against the gravitational force of the earth, and as it's trying to fight against the gravitational force of earth, there are lot of complex operations that different parts of aircraft are involved in, and if any of these operations failed and are not optimal in nature, that can obviously cause aircraft to crash and something like that. So the probability of something going wrong, because so many mechanisms, so many parts are moving, so many electrical electronic components are working together, the probability of something going wrong becomes higher. And again, because aircraft is at very low elevation from the ground, the probability of crash also become high as such. Now, if you try to understand, in the case of the recent Air India disaster also, many pilots and experts have claimed that the reason why aircraft might have crashed is because of the stall. Now, let us try to understand this term. Stall is a very important term, especially in the aviation terminology. So, basically, if we talk about a stall, also experts believe that it is more likely to happen when aircraft is at lower altitude as compared to when it is in a stable flight mode at very high altitude in the lower part of stratosphere, for example. So what is a stall? Let us try to understand first of all that how aircraft is able to lift off from the ground and fight against the gravity. Now, it is all dependent upon largely the wing and the shape of wing that aircraft has. So if you look at this particular diagram, you can see this blue mark here represents the shape of an aircraft. And if you look at this shape of aircraft, basically when the aircraft is taking off, the wing become kind of, if you look at the orientation, wing become kind of inclined from forward to backward position. And because of this, air is moving at a faster rate on the upper part of wing and air is moving at a slower rate in the lower part of wing. Now, when air is moving at a faster rate, the pressure of air becomes low. While when air is moving at slower rate, its pressure become high. That means basically what is happening here is that you have high air pressure below the wing and low air pressure above the wing. So because of high pressure below the wing, it pushes aircraft automatically in the upward direction, and that is how aircraft is able to take off and gain altitude. Now, what generally we see that in the initial ascent phase of aircraft itself, if pilot suppose has increased his angle of attack basically refer to the angle at which aircraft is trying to move in the upward direction. So again, if you look at this particular last diagram, you can see, you compare the first diagram and the second diagram, or first image or second image, we can see in the second image the angle of attack is more steeper. So whenever the angle of attack becomes more steeper, what we see that rather than air flowing in a streamlined fashion uniformly across the entire wing, here we are seeing that air flow at a slower rate, and also you can see there is a kind of what you can call as if you look at the streamlined flow of the air, that has stopped here. So as the streamlined flow of air stops, what you see is multiple vortices and eddies began to take place here, and these vortices and eddies of air pockets that you see here, they start to push the aircraft in the downward direction. So you can understand, aircraft when it is trying to take off, it is trying to move in the upward direction, but this eddies and vortices are trying to push aircraft in the downward direction. So when this happens in such a case, when aircraft is not able to gain altitude, when aircraft is not able to lift itself, it refers to a phase of a stall. Now obviously, if aircraft will not be able to lift itself, it will either collide with the structures such as the high-rise buildings, or finally it will crash into the ground as such. So basically, it's very important to understand that what is the angle of attack, that means what is the angle at which aircraft is trying to ascend, plays a very crucial role in determining that whether aircraft can lift successfully or it will face a stall-like situation as such. Now, also we can say that there are a lot of failures that can take place during the takeoff phase of aircraft. For example, aircraft engine faces their maximum stress during the takeoff phase because they have to lift hundreds and hundreds of tons of weight against the gravitational force in the air as such. Similarly, pilot has to take and make a lot of calculations during the takeoff and landing phase. For example, he has to take note of what is the wind direction, what is the direction, what is the wind speed, what is the speed of the flight, what is the weight of the aircraft, at what angle he should descend in the ground during the time of landing so that it does not dive at all. So all these calculations and the maneuver that he has to do continuously put a lot of stress on the pilot, and then obviously because pilots are also human, there is a chance of error on their side as well. Plus, we try to understand in the lower phases is where most of the birds are flying. It is in the lower phase of the atmosphere where I told you wind is strong. Both vertical wind as well as horizontal wind is flowing at very fast speed as such. The atmospheric density is also very high. So because of this, there is a high probability of all these factors acting adversely or negatively on the flight. Plus weather also can be a big factor. For example, whether it is a lightning strike, whether it is a hailstorms, whether it is a tornadoes, whether we talk about the tropical cyclones and all that. So all these take place in the lower part of troposphere, and as I told you again and again, it is in the lower part of troposphere where both initial takeoff and landing occurs, and that puts flight at a higher risk as such. Now obviously whenever such large scale air crashes and disasters happen, we become fearful that whether it is safe to fly or not. Now obviously we have different modes of transportation through which we can complete our journey, whether it is the train, railways, whether it is the roadways, whether it is the waterway transportation. But out of all the mode of transportation, still if you look at the data from the past, we can say that air transportation is safest mode of travel and such. And this we can look at the number of data or accidents that has happened. Again, as per the IATA's website, in what you can call as between year 2005 to 2023, number of accidents has even declined from 4.9 to 1.9 for every million departures. That means for every million aircraft taking off or landing, 1.9 aircraft has suffered some kind of what you can call as accident as such. Now keep in mind, we are not talking about only the accident which has been deadly and disastrous. Even minor accidents have been included here, and even when you include minor accident, this number still is very low at 1.9. That means if you try to understand from your own perspective, what it basically means, that if you take 1 million flight in your lifetime, there is a probability that 1.9 of those flight will suffer some sort of accident as such. ICAO's definition of aircraft accident, I told you, is fairly broad in nature. Similarly, air crash fatalities also have shown a general downward trend, although this statistic is more prone to year-on-year fluctuation. What it means that it is quite possible in few years you have no crashes or very few crashes, and in 1 year you can have multiple crashes. So that is how we can understand the entire number run on. So for instance, in 2014, 2 major accidents have happened that has contributed to almost 60% of the 911 total fatalities that we have witnessed in the year 2005 to 2023 as such. So overall, what I can say, in last 18 years, 2014 was an outlier because this year has contributed to 60% of total fatality as such. But overall, again, if you try to understand, the aircraft or air travel has been quite safe, and there are various reasons behind this. For example, first of all, aircraft today are using better technology. They are using better and more reliable equipments and all that to deal with the contingencies. So that also has increased their overall performance. Second, pilots are getting much better training as they used to do few decades back because of the modern simulators which can simulate different kind of situations which an aircraft can face, and pilots can be better prepared to tackle those in the real-time scenario as well. Third, we can say there has been significant improvement in the prediction of weather as well. That plays a very important role, and based on those, the decision can be taken either to allow the flight to land or take off, or to what you can call as postpone or even cancel the flight as such. Plus, gathering of various analytical data has helped us to understand the atmospheric phenomena in more detail, mechanism in more detail as such. And most importantly, aviation safety protocols also have become more stringent and refined over time. One example is we can understand from the fact that in the 1990s, smoking was allowed on the aircrafts, on the airplane, which now if you have flown in aircraft, you would know that there is strictly no smoking policies. If you're caught, you will be jailed and even penalized as such. So this is largely, this decision has been taken to ensure safety of the passengers so that minor accidents do not turn into major deadly disaster. So these all reasons we can say is behind more safety we can see and we feel while we are flying in the aircraft as such. So in short, what I can say, more people are flying than ever before, obviously because more and more people who could not fly or could not have imagined to fly 10, 20, 30 years before, they are now flying easily because the airline ticket have become costlier. The number of cities which are connected by airlines, that have increased manifold, especially even if you talk about India as such. but fewer aircrafts are crashing than before, and still fewer fatal accidents are taking place. So obviously these disasters that we see are deadliest in nature. For example, in the recent Air India crash, only one of the passengers were able to survive miraculously, others perished unfortunately. But still, overall, if we try to understand, aircraft is still safest choice to travel as compared to other mode of transportation. So that is all about this particular video. If you like the video, please hit the like button, share the flash buttons, subscribe to the channel, more such content. Thank you very much.